I just put in the chat, maybe while we're waiting for folks to join, if you wanted for folks who are joining virtually to drop in the chat where you're dialing in from.
Yeah, I would love to know.
Thanks, Alyssa, for being the first. Radiris joining from the DR, amazing.
Welcome, welcome.
Atlanta, welcome. Philly,
Whoa.
nice. Mountain View, Miami. More local folks in Atlanta, welcome.
Love the Atlanta representation.
Welcome. If you're just joining us, I was just asking in the chat if you want to drop where you're dialing in from.
Welcome from Los Angeles.
Sandy Springs. I think I've been to Sandy Springs, actually. I think I did a project out of Sandy Springs, Georgia.
I think it's 6:02. I think we're probably good to get started. I'll give a quick introduction. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this first installment of By Design, which is a new speaker series hosted by Georgia Tech's Master of Industrial Design program. Thanks, y'all. So this series is meant to create a platform for conversations with practitioners shaping design across products, systems, and experiences. We bring together designers, entrepreneurs, innovators, and students to explore how design is taught, learned, and practiced in a rapidly evolving technological landscape. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us online, and thank you so much to our students and friends who have joined us for the in-person watch party. My name is Leahy, and I'm a Master of Industrial Design student here at Georgia Tech, and I'm so thrilled to introduce Diana Tobey, who is the Executive Design Director at IDEO's Play Lab. Diana's perspective is shaped by her background in startups, business strategy, and leadership. At IDEO, she leads with the mindset that play is a core design skill, which designers can use to get comfortable with ambiguity, imagine multiple new possibilities, and keep people at the center of their work. As we navigate new forms of emerging technology, this type of mental flexibility is imperative in enabling us to embrace change and make good design decisions. Please join me in welcoming Diana.
Thanks, everyone. It's so fantastic to be here with you today. I'm so excited to actually share something that's really near and dear to my heart, and it's also central to what I do here at IDEO, and it's my deep belief in the transformative power of play. So as you were just hearing, I think right now, so many of us feel awash in this sense of uncertainty and volatility in the world that we live in and the things that are changing so quickly around us. It's actually created what some have called a culture of futurelessness, which I think is just a really interesting term. But it's based on some research from a cultural insight studio called Starling. And they have some really interesting stats, like the fact that 16 to 24-year-olds are 5 times more likely to say that they're scared about the future than those who are 12 to 15. And that over half of 12 to 24-year-olds actually believe today that it would have been easier to be born into an earlier generation. And that's just a really tough, kind of pessimistic state of mind to be in. And when the world feels like it's on fire, of course, it can sometimes be easier to look backwards and romanticize the past rather than dare to imagine a bright and optimistic future. But I think we can all recognize that retreating into nostalgia isn't going to help us build a world that all of us want to live in. And if we want to design those futures that we as individuals and also collectively really want to live in, we can't afford to lose that creative and optimistic spark. We actually have to intentionally and actively fuel our imagination. And that's why I think for me, cultivating a playful mindset. It's not just about having fun, although, of course, I would love for all of us to have more fun in our lives. But to me, it's really a non-negotiable ingredient for how we design for new product innovation and how we design for these futures that we're excited to be a part of. So especially when we're wrestling with complex, fast-changing, emerging technologies, it's just a really critical skill set for all of us to remember that we have and that we can tap into. So I'll go ahead and get started. Maybe just by a first quick show of hands for those in the room, and maybe virtually if you could use your like raise hand feature at the top of your nav bar. I'm curious how many of you have heard of IDEO before. Taking a look over here. Okay, nice, nice. Great. Seeing lots of hands up. This is not a test, by the way. It's okay if you haven't. Um, I just am always really curious when I'm giving a talk, how, whether people know about IDEO or when they've found out about IDEO. For me personally, it was when I took a new product development class in college. And honestly, you'd be kind of surprised at IDEO. We continue here a lot of people when they ask about potentially working with us, we ask how they heard about us. Very many continue to reference a NBC Nightlight episode from 1999 where we redesigned the shopping cart. So, you just never know kind of how people find out about you and hear about you. But for those who don't know, IDEO is a global design and innovation firm. And for nearly 50 years, we have helped to build the future. And we've done so with a human-centered design lens. This is just a quick peek at some of the various things that we've played a role in designing, whether that was pioneering some of the first computer mice and laptops in the 80s to the 2010s when we designed the first wearable breast pump with Willow. Or there's another one where in there, in the middle actually, where we reimagined the pharmacy experience as digital first with a company called PillPack. They actually started as an IDEO startup in residence. They grew so quickly that they purchased our tables and chairs, and ultimately they were acquired by Amazon for $1 billion. And then even more recently, or maybe even I would say in the future, the reinvention of supersonic air travel that you can see in the top right, with a new airliner that is set to launch in 2029. So I just kind of like to show a little bit of like emerging technology today often refers to AI, but it's much more than that. And it's certainly more than the hype cycle that surrounds AI. At least for IDEO, throughout our history, we have always been navigating the rapid changes and the new possibilities that are available to us from a technology standpoint. And there's actually been many areas of that I'm happy to share with you a little bit later today. For IDEO, I think I can say, and I'm sure many of my peers would say, it's really been a true privilege to partner with some of the world's leading companies and tackle some of their most gnarly and complex challenges. And throughout that all, one of the things that's really been instrumental to our work is, especially when we're designing at the edges and exploring what's possible and thoughtfully considering what role emerging technologies could and should play in our lives, is that it's that mindful, that playful mindset that I mentioned earlier. And I think I have an interesting take on that because I'm a proud member of the IDEO Play Lab. It's a small lab within IDEO. And for the last 35 years, we have this amazing team of talented designers that you see here, and we have all championed the power of play, both in our work, out in the world, in our personal lives. And what's really interesting is that half of our team focuses on toy invention and game design. So they've brought over 250 products to market with leading brands like Hasbro or Mattel, Spin Master, Melissa and Doug. Many of you have probably actually played with some of these toys or purchased them as gifts for your nieces and nephews or siblings or friends. And the other half of our business is actually in consulting, but we still bring those same principles of play and designing with delightful game mechanics, and we apply them to really tough challenges that we're seeing in the industry. And that could be designing an app to help people quit smoking, Or for the last year, personally, I've been designing loyalty programs that people actually want to keep playing. So it can really mean a lot of different things and apply in a lot of different ways, but fundamentally, it's this core belief in the power of play. Now, at IDEO as a whole, something that is a core tenet or philosophy for how we practice design, it's through this lens of human-centered design thinking. So whenever we're approaching a problem, we're always looking at that intersection of not just what's technically feasible, but what's viable from a business perspective, what's actually desirable for the people that we're designing for or with. And then over time, we've actually added a fourth lens at the bottom, which is what's responsible for our world, for our society, and the type of impact that we're hoping to create. So for many years, our mission has actually been to create disproportionate positive impact in the world through design. And so that fourth lens has become more and more important over time. And I think that again today, as we're facing this explosion of emerging technologies, it's really more important than ever that all of us remember great design is living at the intersection of these four circles. It's not too overly weighted on one or the other, and to not limit our thinking to not only what's possible with technology, and just to remember that, just because we can build something doesn't mean that we should. So at IDEO, when we are starting our work, we always start actually with that what is desirable people lens, and we really anchor that throughout our work. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, I get the design thinking part. I think I'm sold there, but play, I don't know. I have some doubts. Maybe I'm a little skeptical, and that's totally fine. I think for me, over time, and especially through my tenure at the Play Lab, I've actually seen that play has become more and more important. There's these broad systemic shifts happening in our world right now that's influencing all of us, whether that is at the climate or technology or even at the social, emotional level. And actually, what's really interesting about like our neuroscience and our brain chemistry is that in these moments where things feel really out of control and our survival instincts start to kick in, there's actually a desire to crave more certainty and more control. It's kind of an instinct that kicks in. We try to eliminate all of the risk around us. Just what's the sure thing that we can cling to? And also, if you think about it like from maybe a more social angle, like many years of education in school or at work have actually taught us that there's a single safe right answer. And so much so that it's actually becomes a baseline for what we expect in our lives. So when we don't have the answer, when you're faced with a problem where you're like, I don't know what to do here, you can start to feel really anxious and worried. But I think one of the things that's been really interesting for me as I've been sitting in the Play Lab and probing on this is like, what if in some moments that instinct to kind of close up and seek more control is actually what holds us back from coming up with really big, innovative, game-changing ideas. It's certainly something I've experienced actually. When I first started at IDEO and I started joining brainstorms, we would be in the room and they would have, we often use something called a how might we statement. So we'd have this how might we statement up there and we're all brainstorming. And I would sit there and I'd be like, I'm going to come up with like the best answer. I'm just going to like sit here, I'm going to think, and then I'm going to like, going to impress everyone. But what I quickly saw through my first brainstorms at IDEO is actually usually those best ideas don't come because you only sit there and you think of like the one or two. It's because people are putting post-its up and they're just throwing wild ideas out there and they're building up on each other's ideas. And it's that kind of creative catalyst for how we come together and collaborate. That usually that's the process for how we get to the ideas. It's not about how hard you're thinking or how smart you are. It's about being really able to embrace that process. And so just for a quick moment, I would love for all of us to do an exercise together. And I'm going to ask everyone to actually close your eyes, and don't worry, it's just for 1 minute. For those in the room, please close your eyes. I'm sure it's easier for folks who are virtually, no one's seeing you, but I want everyone to just close your eyes and imagine with me. It's nighttime, dark outside. You are standing in this endless field of grass, and we are all about to fly to the moon and back. But don't go yet, just wait for my countdown. We're going to go 3, 2, 1, blast off. All right. I'd love for everyone to start making your way back from orbit. Going to give you maybe 10 more seconds just to land. And when you have landed here back on Earth, you can go ahead and open your eyes. Right, I actually can't see that well, folks in the room, and certainly folks who are online, but I'll check. Did everyone make it back okay? Is there anyone else like lingering out in space? We've got to send some emergency services to go rescue you. Okay, I'll assume we all made it back. I would love to ask how many of you decided to fly up to space in either a space shuttle or like a rocket ship? Maybe show of hands. Again, folks on in virtual, if you want to raise your hand, just so you sense. Okay, see a couple hands there. Anyone concerned about safety and make sure that you're wearing a space suit, right, with your helmet on? Got to make sure, safety first. All right. I am really curious. For those who didn't do a space shuttle or rocket ship, how did you get to the moon? Feel free to drop it in chat, or if you're in the room, I don't know who needs to unmute, but would love to hear some responses. Just flying, no equipment, like Superman style?
Yeah, Superman style.
Uh-huh.
Same.
Nice, I see.
There was
What was
no,
that?
there was nothing, it was just us.
I
Nice.
floated up like a hot air balloon kind of thing.
Ooh, a hot air balloon. So
No, there was
cool.
no balloon, but I floated in that way.
Oh, okay, okay.
Iron Man stuff, like with rocket powered boots.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Rocket
rocket
powered
boots.
boots. Nice. Yeah, I would buy that. That sounds great. Ooh, I'm seeing in the chat some wings, a ship made of glass and wings. Nice. Just a backpack. A giant flower that grew out of the ground. Oh, nice. That's cool. A broom on fire. Ooh, I'm getting like a little bit of like Kiki's delivery service there. So I love that. That's all fun. And it's actually an exercise. We call it Blast to the Moon. We do it all the time. And what's really interesting is when we do this exercise with adults, oftentimes people just go to the moon and then they come right back. Why? Well, we are, as adults, rewarded usually for task completion. How quickly, efficiently, correctly do we complete the task? In IDEO language, we might say that that's a lot of conditioning around convergence. How quickly can we kind of get to groupthink around this is like the one right answer and like we're going to do it, we're going to come back. But what's really fun is we do this exercise also with kids of all ages, and especially with young kids. It's usually a fight to try and pull them back to the room and get them back to Earth with me. They could be out there doing backflips, preparing to be Superman, fighting space villains, playing with aliens, building a space station. I mean, it's endless. And so we often think about that as this opportunity to diverge. I've given you an instruction, you've got to get to the moon and back, but I didn't tell you how. And I think the ability to really thrive in that space and to not feel the pressure of like, oh, I feel so silly. Like, is anyone watching me? Like, oh, it's been kind of a long time. I'm kind of getting antsy, right? Like, those are all things that are natural to come up, but the ability to get past them is really, really important. And part of the reason is that, I love that, doing loops around the moon like a roller coaster. That sounds fun. But, if we are to all of us to face these kind of unprecedented times, we are all going to have to find a way to stay really agile and open-minded and optimistic and to imagine a world that has not existed before. And that's why for me, sometimes people say play is the opposite of work. It is not. It is not the opposite of work, and it is not a distraction. In fact, it is a catalyst for how you unlock breakthrough innovation. It is perhaps one of the most effective ways that all of us have to navigate the unknown. Because if you think about it, play is how we naturally explore, take small risks, try things. In the startup world, often they talk about like not having a fear of failure. Well, that is what play naturally brings to the table and opens that space for creativity and unexpected ideas. And what's really fascinating is, if you think about play as the opposite of work, well, all of us are born as children knowing how to play. We're gifted with this like instinctive desire to play. But work is actually something that we learn over time. We're socialized how to work. So when we have this kind of false dynamic or perception of play as a distraction to work, we're actually missing out on some of like the most powerful, like innate tools that we have in our bodies for reimagining the world. And what's interesting is there's actually a lot of science behind this. I don't have time today to dig kind of nerd out on the neuroscience behind it, but for now, I just want to share this quick anecdote of like play is this innate behavior, not just for humans, but for many, many animals. And that's particularly fascinating because from an evolutionary perspective, like energy is required to play. And you could spend that energy on like finding food or producing offspring. And, you know, if you play in the animal world, like you could get injured, you could get eaten by a predator. Like there's like real consequences to spending that energy, that, you know, limited energy that you have on play. And yet it's something that has survived so many years of millions of years, right, of evolution. And like, why is that? Well, there's actually a really interesting study from Robert Fagan, and he studied Alaskan brown bear cubs for almost, or I think for over 2 decades. And he found that the cubs who played the most had the highest survival rates, not just themselves, but even their offspring had higher survival rates. And it turns out that when you play, it actually broadens and diversifies your behavior repertoire. So the things that you do and are willing to try and feel confident doing. And so it's through play that animals can actually build up the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances, right? So like the fishing river that you go to for food, it dries up, or deforestation, right? Or any number of habitat changes that have happened as a result of climate change over the years. So that's the same for animals as it is for us, right? When we are playing and when we're exploring, we're practicing new skills in a safe environment, then later on, when something dangerous comes up, we're better prepared to face that. And so I like to say that play prepares the player to face the unexpected and an unpredictable world. And so I would love to share with you how this has actually played out at IDEO across 3 different eras of designing for emerging tech. I'm going to get started with the dawn of personal computing back in the 80s. Of course, I was not at IDEO quite yet, so this is a bit of hearsay, but as the story goes, Steve Jobs saw a glimpse of the future when he toured Xerox PARC, and he tasked his engineers at Apple with the GUI, and he asked us to take this really expensive, finicky, delicate mouse prototype and somehow make it a $10 mouse, right? Something that consumers could actually afford. And you know, this is the 80s. Like, no one knew what a mouse was, or like, why is it named after an animal? Like, personal computers, digital interfaces, although today they're one of the primary ways we interact with the world, it wasn't then. And one of the early insights that was really pivotal to our design was that people didn't have this expectation that if you moved your mouse an inch, that your cursor would move an inch. Now, of course, it seems obvious in retrospect, but at the time, all of this behavior was just still so new. And that insight allowed us to lower the threshold for accuracy and allowed us to get much more creative about how we could prototype possible solutions. And then we explored, we experimented, and the unlikely inspiration for our final design actually came from the Atari game controller, which you can kind of see in that top left picture is like that white ball in the center. And so we ran to the store, we got like a deodorant ball, and we took it out. We flipped the unit upside down so that gravity was able to keep that ball free flowing. And it's through that design that we were able to not only dramatically reduce the complexity, but also bring that price down to realistic levels. And it's interesting because this same mechanism is still what's used for most computer mice that you see on the market today. All right, so now I'm going to fast forward like a couple decades, and we're going to go into the era of mobile computing, especially with the launch of the App Store in 2008. So one of our clients is Sesame Workshop, and they came to us to design some of the very first apps for kids. And I personally grew up watching Sesame Street. That's how I fell in love with the characters. And I was actually really impressed how forward-thinking this client was. We've worked with them many times over the years. That at that moment, even in the early days of the App Store, they saw that there could be a whole new generation of kids that are first introduced to Sesame Street through a mobile app rather than through the TV. And actually, even in that time, our design team was already considering AI and how much that should play a role in the interaction. And do we need to invest in natural language processing and voice recognition? And, apps were so new at the time, and we knew we were designing for young kids. So we had to be really intentional about the technology. But this is actually a story around some of the playful approaches we brought to prototyping. So as an example, one of our early ideas was like, oh, what if like Elmo is like dancing, and it's like he's dancing in sync to a simple music track, and if we click on the screen, he like does a different move. So we quickly sketched it up after a brainstorm on some Post-its, and the team was still a little bit skeptical. So we thought we would make a quick prototype. Let me see if I can play this here.
Cue music. So this is possible dance moves for Monster Maker. So music starts, and I'm the player, so I come in and I touch the monster, and he gives me a special dance move. I go and touch again, and he does a different one. And I can go for as long as I want, and he has a few signature moves. And when I've had enough and I'm done dancing, I touch the back button, it pauses, and the music stops. Monster Maker.
Cool.
That's all I can. That's all I can.
Wow.
Get in there.
All right, so I think you can tell here, prototyping, it's funny, right? Right now, I mean, for many years now, there's been a big trend in like low code, no code solutions. Well, here is no code in, the knots. Our designers grabbed a sheet of foam core, they printed a giant picture of the iPhone, they interacted with the way that we imagine the experience coming to life. It's super scrappy, super hilarious, very endearing, and ultimately much more persuasive than a Post-it. This is actually the prototype that won the team over, and it became Elmo's Monster Maker. And nearly 2 decades later, some of these early apps that we designed for the App Store remain on the top lists of apps for kids. So again, just goes to show you that even though a lot of that conversation is happening now, like there are early seeds of it for many years past. So now we're going to arrive at the era of generative AI. I don't think there's any sound to this, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a project that I worked on for Ethically, and this was back in 2002, before the big launch of GPT and when it started to do that hockey stick growth. So even before we knew what technology was fully capable of, these 3 brothers came to us with this ambition of revolutionizing writing education in the US with the help of AI. In the US, for those who don't know, reading and math are tested every 2 years. I know many of you are students, so that may not be too long in the distant past for you. But I'm curious if if math and reading are tested every 2 years, how often is writing tested? Curious if anyone wants to drop any guesses in the chat or shout out any answers.
I think it's like 1 in 8 or 1 in 6, what I remember.
3 years. Okay. It is actually, the answer is every 20 years, which is a whole entire generation of students. And so, at the time that we were working with them, obviously all of us had just undergone this massive social shift with COVID, and we still didn't know what the consequences of distance learning and all of the social effects of that are on writing education. And so at that time, they asked us, like, how could we harness the power of AI in a really thoughtful, ethical way? Again, when none of us were really even certain what it was possible of, certainly not so many of the things that we may take for granted today. And what we learned was that, there's this very prevalent narrative in technology, which is that it's all about efficiency, right? How quick, cheap, fast can you get something to do? That's the power of AI. And one of the early concerns that we had was like, if this technology was out there, would students want to cheat? Right? Should we let the AI write the essay for them? Should we let the AI grade the essay for the teacher? And we quickly learned through our research that not all work is created equal. Not all work can be automated the same way. So we heard from students that, yeah, cheating is definitely a temptation, but it's usually because a series of things have gone wrong, where it's like the essays due, they don't know what to write about, they have a lot of friction around like just getting started. And so then the temptation is just there. But if there was some way that they could actually get past the blank page problem, which by the way is not just something that students face, like even professional writers face that, that would really help them to not want to cheat, because ultimately students care about like the value of learning how to write, the value of developing their own voice. And same thing on the teacher side, right? Like giving that personalized feedback is how they connect with their students as humans. And this is an early teacher that we did some research with and also tested an early prototype of this. He said that for him, designing writing assignments is like designing a video game. If you make it too easy because AI does all the work, then it's actually going to feel really boring. And if you make it too hard, then students are going to give up. So you kind of have this like, proximate zone that you want to stay within to keep it challenging, but not too challenging. And most importantly, if we were to automate so much of the grading, we would kind of take away the meaning and purpose of their work, right? To see their students improving, to see their students building confidence in their writing skills. And, analogy for me is like, if you think about the game of golf, I am not a golf player, but if you were to break that down into its simplest form, it's like, okay, you get a ball and you get into a hole, right? So if you were to follow that prevailing tech philosophy of like uber efficiency, optimizing for uber efficiency, well, you would just take the ball and you'd walk over and you drop it in the hole. But like, where's the fun in that, right? So instead, we invent all these crazy rules of like, you have to hit it with a long stick, a very long distance, past all of these obstacles like sand pits. And yet that friction is meaningful. That friction is what makes it the game. It's what gives you a sense of progress and mastery as you get better. It's what makes it fun to compete or play with friends, or even maybe to compete against your own personal best. So friction is not the problem. Friction that gets in your way can be a problem, but sometimes friction is what helps to create the meaning for users. And so, we did ultimately design this writing product, and it takes those like very unhelpful parts of friction, like that blank page problem, or for the teacher, like, yeah, grading like or fixing basic grammatical errors, like you missed a period or this is misspelled. Sure, let's automate that part. But how do we preserve the meaningful friction around developing critical thinking and playing a human role in that, the human connection between the teachers and the students? And so ultimately that was really helpful. And this product is now on market in 25 countries. And so that was it was great to see that come to life. And so as you saw through some of these different eras of designing for emerging technologies, that playful, divergent type of thinking is really a critical ingredient in unlocking innovative ideas. And as all of you are stepping into this rapidly changing era, I want you to remember that, the goal is not to make everything fast and frictionless, just as it's not for you to also strip away the joy of exploring. And so I hope you don't freeze up when you face a challenge. Resist the impulse to like buckle down. In fact, one of the things you can do is reach up into the sky and pull down your kid hat, even if temporarily, so that you can really tap into that superpower of play that you are born with, that you have within you, and use that to figure out the bits of joy in your life that you want to bring out, the joy that you want to bring out in your users' lives, and find ways for technology to elevate that joy and not automate all of it. So I hope you enjoyed my share, and I'd be happy to open up to some questions now.
Diana, that was so wonderful and insightful. And I think it's definitely something that like play, I think lends itself beyond just the realm of design. I immediately have so many thoughts and things that I want to ask, but I'm going to hold back and open it up to everyone in the room. Feel free to raise your hand, definitely project, or anyone joining us virtually, feel free to pop any questions in the chat.
Really, the question.
Free pizza pizza.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear the question. What was the question?
I didn't ask question, but okay, I'm gonna start. Hello. Nice.
This
Hi.
way.
Hi. Nice to meet
Oh, right here, right here.
you. Hi, the mic is over here. Hi, I'm Eunsu Kwon. I'm the chair of the School of Industrial Design. What a fantastic presentation you give the opening of by design. So we
Oh,
are
thank
very
you so
grateful.
much.
I look at the participant from the chat side. We have amazing designers actually joining. Brian Lodeman is there. Michelle Berryman is there. So we have amazing, guests. So they may have some questions, but I'm gonna give an opportunity to our student first. They should be the brave. Hello.
Here, come on up.
Hello. Stand directly in front of you.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure. I'm curious if you've come up against any pushback for the philosophy of play, of people saying that it is a waste of time or childish or confusing enjoyment with naivete or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that there is definitely a sense in some, business circles that like play is frivolous. And one of the things that I think, because I also have a background in like startups, early stage startups, I just think it's really fascinating because at the same time that they would maybe not like the word play, they are, elevating some of the philosophy of like startup mentality of like learn to fail as quickly as you can, or this idea of like being able to really pivot and change your mind. So sometimes in those cases I would just change my language or my vocabulary because it's really more about like what are we trying to achieve rather than necessarily getting everyone to fall in love with the word play. And so I might talk about it as like it's an experiment, or how quickly can we test our hunches, or how can we de-risk some of our ideas by trying things out. And so it would surprise you how many times we've actually gotten C-suite executives to role play or do something that is very play oriented, but we would just use maybe different terms for it. And maybe just to connect it, I saw there was a question here around how do you manage and prioritize play and creativity within the corporate structure of KPIs and shareholder value? That is an excellent question. I can't tell you the number of times that a client comes to us to be innovative, but then is like, but we can't do that. We've tried that. It doesn't work. Our competitors already do that, so we can't do that. So one of the tactics that we often use, besides actually, we've literally brought physical kid hats, like the ones with the spinners on top, and had people put them on before. But one of the activities that I really like to do is called the magic circle. It's a term that we're borrowing from the world of video game design. And, in video games, the magic circle describes this liminal space that you step into when you step into the game world, right? Suddenly, I'm no longer Diana, I'm Peach, and Princess Peach, right? And I have this like superpower where I can float, or I can do all these really cool tricks, or I can drive really quickly, and I can drift turn. And suddenly, when you're in the game world, you have new abilities, you have no superpowers, you have new goals, new quests. And sometimes that's actually what we need for our clients to be able to step into that right mindset. So, we once did like a virtual workshop where we created it was kind of like space themed. So we had a spaceship where we had everyone drop their Post-its of like, what's holding your attention right now? What are all the skeptical things that are coming up for you? Write them down. They're not going away. Like, what are all the constraints, right? Put them in the airlock. We're going to close it and we're going to shoot it off to space. Don't worry. They'll be there when we land from our space travel together. So they're not going away. You're still coming back to your day job. Those constraints are still a reality, but just temporarily for like the next 60 or 90 minutes, play with us, right? Join us in this experiment on like what's possible rather than killing ideas too quickly. So like those are some of the things that we have to kind of trade off and balance, but fundamentally it's the philosophy still stands. It just could be that some people need a little bit more time to get there.
Yes. Do you want to come on up?
Sure.
We have a question on the, raise the hand.
Hello.
Ah,
Where does play or designing with play fit into the human-centered design process?
Mhm.
That's
That's a really great question. So I think for to be totally honest, we have wondered and talked about play in different ways. Like, is play a design craft in the same way that like industrial design or an interaction design is? I think where we've landed is that play is a unique lens that we bring to our work. You know, a lot of our work it can sit in kind of like the more management consulting type of strategy and vision stuff that there's a lot of different players in that space. But play, especially when you're thinking about like the underlying components of it, how do you design for really delightful, engaging experiences? Or again, to borrow more from game design, how do you design for that extrinsic motivation? So not just like as a company or as a business, what are the incentives that we dangle in front of you, but what's your own internal personal reason for playing an experience or engaging with something? So with that, I think is a really interesting add-on to the design process. And one of the ways that we've seen this come to life actually is we'll sometimes prototype a really basic, simple game as a way of helping our clients understand that the world is malleable, right? Some of these things that they've come to believe to be fixed state, this will never change, in fact, can change. And in fact, they can play a role in changing it. And so even just last month, actually, we were inviting a group. We had a conglomerate in Latin America, and their leadership came to our team, and we took one of the business strategies that we're designing with them, and we turned it into a board game so that they could kind of play with the elements, right? And again, there's something about game design which is so relevant when you're designing for complex systems, because through a game in a couple of different rounds, you can see the impact play out like in minutes rather than in the real world, it could be months or years. So things like, you know, if you're trying to improve your sustainability efforts, right? And like, what are all the different ways we can do that? Or, you know, we're doing a lot of work in the mental health space. Who are all the different players that we have to kind of get into alignment to make something real? A game is actually a really helpful and practical way of anchoring people. And then I think there's a couple, you can search online for this. There's a couple of free games that we've created for this. So like one of them is around ecosystem tiles, and it's this idea of like, if you were to break down the underlying business into like sources of revenue or costs or partners, and then you can add on rules like vanishing options. Like, here is a core aspect of your business today. Let's just imagine that for some reason tomorrow it vanished. What would you do? How would you change? How would you adapt? Or even we recently did a strategy board game for the CEO of Hasbro. He wanted his leadership team to take more bold creative bets. So we designed a simulation where they could practice running toy companies, but without the actual real world consequences of like, I might lose money, people might lose their jobs. But to practice, what are the things that I want to invest in so that I am staying sharp and I am being creative and I am being bold? So all of these things, like they're practice, and play is a way for us to all do that in a very psychologically safe and fun way to like actually understand what are some of the core things that we're designing for. What do we hold sacred? What are we really trying to accomplish? Sorry, it was a very long-winded answer, but I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with so many different things, the keeping people at the center of their work, especially just as things evolve so rapidly, I think that kind of gets lost within that rapid pace of technology. I know AI is one that people think about a lot, even though we talked about all types of emerging technology. But one question for the chat was asking about how, as AI becomes more capable of generating ideas itself, how do you see the role of human play and creativity evolving in the design process?
Yeah, so I love that question. I would say that for the last 2 years, like the rest of the world, we have been challenged by our clients and also are challenging ourselves to reimagine what these things look like. I will say that at least today, I think AI does a really good job of wanting to help and wanting to get you an answer to the point where I think if you take the first response, it's often very like shallow and it's hard to really tease out the most critical parts. So like personally, for example, we've experimented with using AI for research synthesis. We've even experimented with like synthetic users. And it it can often get to a really interesting output, but as we try to then use that to shape and inform our design, it's been a lot more of a struggle. And I think it's because design ultimately is not just about the output, right? Like I think there's a myth, right? Like design is just making something look pretty. But it's not. Design is, I think, for at least for me, and I know many others share this philosophy, it's like it's really wanting to wrestle with the why of like, why is this important? What is it doing for us? If we use this over time, how does it shape who we become as people, as humans? How does it influence our relationships to ourselves, to our others, to friends and loved ones? And I think it's through that process that is quite messy and is not easy to spit out as a, answer in a chat thread that great design happens. And so I think there's been a lot of discourse around the role of craft or the role of taste. I think that's different ways of talking about it. But I think we're still at a point where it's not necessarily just like a human in the loop. It's, I guess the way I would describe it is each of us as individuals bring a very unique perspective to the work that we touch. And it's not just our roles, it's not just our education, it's the summation of our lived experience, the people who have shaped us, the books, the movies that we love. And I don't think that we're at a moment where that raw creative input can be automated in a way that drives truly like novel, innovative ideas, right? I think that for me personally, I found that AI is really good as like an initial brainstorm partner, like because I can interrogate it to like push me more here, push me more there, especially on things where, designing for accessibility. What are some of the things that I wouldn't have considered for people who are blind or who have mobility issues? So like I find that it's really great in helping me think broad and to keep pushing on discovery, but I have not found a tool that really has eliminated or shortcut the need for me to just sit down and do some deep thinking around like, what am I even trying to do here? What am I trying to design? And I think that if anything, I don't think we should lose that. I think it's a really, really important process we should hold on to.
Definitely. And I think like as designers, AI will definitely shape the way we work, but we as designers will shape the way the AI works. If we zoom out of that a little bit and look at ethically, I think AI in education is such an interesting case, just because some people have met it with a lot of excitement and a way to kind of equalize education a little bit more, while others have fully banned it. So how did you find that both of those broader cultural attitudes and kind of institutional constraints shaped that specific project?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on. There's such a visceral like gut reaction to AI, especially in education, but I mean, I would say equally in some spaces like in mental health, right? That you have this very sharp divide. And one of the things that we saw, because again, we started working with Ethically before GPT, then GPT came out and we were like, oh, wow, like we can really go. There was this huge backlash in the education system. Like some schools said that now we have to, they mandated that all essays had to be written like in person in the classroom. One of our founders, his daughter's high school actually canceled writing assignments altogether, which kind of sends this like really weird signal like, hey, students, we don't trust you. We don't believe you're not going to cheat. And so we're so sure of this that we are going to not write essays. We're not going to teach writing. I mean, it's just like a really, again, that like trigger response. So I think the hard part for us really was how do we dig a little bit deeper and how do we kind of excavate what's below the emotions? And, at its core, it's no different in education than it is even at work, right? Like I think people are afraid of losing their jobs. People are worried that, their perspective is not going to be relevant or it's going to be redundant. But I think that that's sometimes the wrong question that you're trying to solve for, right? Like the question that we're designing for is not, will students cheat? The question that we're designing for is, how do we create a writing experience that's so enjoyable, that is so aligned with the students' intrinsic motive and what we're actually trying to accomplish, and their internal goal of like wanting to become better writers or wanting to develop their critical thinking, wanting to figure out their own point of view, that they're not so governed by the extrinsic motivation of just like getting a good score on that essay, right? And so it's about how do you design a system where that temptation to cheat is less than the temptation to actually go after the thing that you care about and what you care more of, right? And this is, I think broadly, the word gamification I have a love-hate relationship with, but I think that's the intent of it, which is there's so many things in our lives that are really hard to actually motivate ourselves to do, right? To eat healthy, go to the gym, exercise, go to sleep early, don't doom scroll. It's really interesting because I think right now what I'm seeing from a trend perspective is that people are actually so sick of the whole world telling them what they can and cannot do that they're just like, get out of my face. I want to be offline. I want to do nothing. I will decide for myself how I want to live my life. But I think gamification, if you harness, not just like shallow points and badges and sprinkling it on top of an experience, right? Because ultimately, if you treat it like frosting, well, frosting's not going to change how bad your cake tastes if your cake is just really gross. So I think if you truly harness the real game design or game mechanics or game principles, it's ultimately about, like tapping into deeper intrinsic motivations of like what you actually want to achieve in life, but then removing some of the so keep the meaningful friction bits, but remove some of the things that get in the way of that. And so that's, I think, the part where there is the potential to go deeper by challenging how we think about the problem and reframing it from something that's more likely to kind of like emotionally trigger us into like it is or it isn't, like that bifurcation is usually not helpful because the world doesn't live in kind of a black or white way. And to really be able to give ourselves the freedom to explore what sits at those like messy intersections.
That is super helpful. Thank you. Yeah, we have a couple more questions.
Yeah. I just want to ask like how IDEO is integrating the AI into your current design workflow, and also what is the new expectation for the new generation of designer as a junior, just like.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. So we are naturally, I think, tinkerers and prototypers and experimenters, and so we love to try the new tools as they come out and experiment them with ourselves. We have also, in some cases, been pushed by clients to use very specific tools. So I remember a project at the beginning of last year, they're like, you have to use the new, I think it was Sora, and I was like, we don't have, it's not out yet. We don't have licenses. How are we supposed to do that? But I would say what I have seen is, at IDEO at least, is that it's really important that we don't just all go into our own individual solo creative sandboxes, because that is how most AI tools are designed. There's not really like a multiplayer mode for GPT or Claude, right? Like there's a lot of, oh, I did this and I got to this like HTML file and I'm going to toss it over to you. And now I have to upload that into my AI tool. And now I have to, and so what I've found is that it's really important, especially for our junior designers, to still have dedicated time with a craft mentor. And that is something that IDEO that we do. When you're hired, you're paired with a craft mentor to sit down and interrogate a design that you're using AI for with a real human being, right? And to do it together and to do it collaboratively and to be able to ask someone who has more experience to help inform, what am I missing? What, you know, because AI, you can ask that question, but I can't guarantee that its results, and sometimes it's really helpful, sometimes it's not. So having a human there beside you to sometimes actually even debate, oh, I really like what it did here, or that's really creeping me out, right? Like to have that banter is still a really critical part of the experience. And it's also why I personally make the recommendation for people that when you're starting careers, do still try to prioritize in person if possible, right? I know it's hard and there's lots of different reasons why you might pick a remote job, but especially in the early years, being able to learn from your peers, from craft mentors, or even just to be able to collide with other coworkers who see the problem from very different lenses or different, you know, business functions. It's actually a really important part of developing your own perspective on what's important and how you want to approach those problems.
Thank you, thank you. I see we have a hand up. Someone in the audience, is that a question?
That might have been from when I asked people to raise their hands up. I do see, at least in the recent thread, Sanvi, I hope I pronounced your name right. So you can absolutely get better at play. And yes, there are many ways you could do that. And also, yes, thank you for spotlighting my article that I wrote last year, but around busting the myths of gamification. But one of my favorite exercises that I recommend, it's what I practice and what I encourage is, one of the simplest things you can do is just as you're going about your everyday life, pick anything at random and be like, how would I design that differently? And I intentionally say differently because I don't think you should use the word better or best. That already puts you into a mind of editing, right? Like you're already trying to think, well, it needs to be like better, it needs to sell more, it needs to make more money, whatever better means to you. So I just say different, right? So like, these scissors, how could I design them differently? This flower pot, how could I design it differently? And over time, because I mean, again, if you're living in the same spaces, you're often seeing the same objects, to keep going. One of the things that we see in our brainstorm sessions is that usually when you start brainstorming, there's like a flood of really great ideas at the beginning. And then you get to kind of like this doldrum in the middle where you're like, oh, I'm just like really struggling to find more ideas. But if you keep pushing, usually the tail end are some incredible ideas, like out of left field, don't even know how you got there. And so the ability to, again, take everyday objects and just push yourself to like think about different ways that you could redesign them, not for any reason beyond just trying it and having fun with it. That's a really fun one. And I think it just keeps practicing that playful mindset, but also in a very craft forward way.
Amazing. I know we are almost at time. Does anyone have any last quick questions? Yeah.
Hey Diana, got a quick question. Can the idea of play be inculcated or used in more grittier topics like designing for climate-related disasters and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that actually that is where play, honestly, it is instrumental, because in some of these spaces you are dealing with a lot of hardship, right? Like your users who are burnt out, like, you know, burnt out caregivers, for example. I'm actually working on a project right now in like the adult caregiving space. Like that is a really tough problem, right? If you have an informal caregiver who's holding down a full-time job, taking care of an aging parent who's suddenly creating all sorts of weird relationships of like, you're my parent, but I am taking care of you, or you're forgetting who I am, right? Like these are very rich and complicated spaces. And the ability to bring a little bit of fun and playfulness and levity isn't just for the sake of like, oh yeah, let's just like do something fun. Or like, you know, sometimes people treat team offsites. It's like, let's just go out and like not do the things we normally do, but like call it an offsite. But like, it's actually critical. And I think we've heard this from our clients in health, right? We've done a lot of work in mental health, but also in traditional health systems. Sometimes it's being able to, again, temporarily lift the weight that you have placed on your shoulders, or that your company or your team has placed on your shoulders. And that's really important for you to be able to actually open your aperture and see the problem in a new way. And so, one of the things that we use, and again, would recommend everyone try out, is this idea of analogous inspiration. If you feel like you're trying to innovate in this space and you keep saying like, oh, how are my competitors doing it? Or who's number one in my space? How are they doing it? And you just cannot break through to where, how can we do things differently? I recommend that you check out, like, try to describe what you're trying to design in a broad enough way that you can go after an entirely different space. So we once did a redesign of an emergency room, and we found inspiration from a NASCAR pit crew, because fundamentally both of those teams are designing in very fast-paced environments where every second counts. And there's a lot to learn, even though you would never normally compare those two. There's actually a ton to learn from and inspire your design. So like, keep doing those kinds of things, because that's not, again, a distraction. It's actually fundamental to our ability to keep pushing the edges and to keep staying creative around what's possible.
Thank you.
Well, I think that is all the time we have. Thank you so much, Diana. It was so wonderful to hear your perspective. And I know we covered so many different topics and the conversation went in so many different directions, but I think I can speak for everyone watching that we all learned a lot, and it was so wonderful.
Yes, and thank you, Leahy, for putting together this amazing series. I'm excited to see the rest of the speakers come out. Amazing. Thanks all. Have a great night. Bye.